Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest Liverpool.com podcast. I am Kristian Walsh, and with me this week are the same people who were with me last week. It's Dan Morgan and Joel Rabinowitz. How are we, gentlemen?
How are we? The question, the eternal question is back.
I've got an actual answer for it this week as well.
Go ahead, Joel.
Well, it's my first day of freedom after 14 days in quarantine after coming back from Spain. So, yeah, exciting. I can actually go out and do things again, which is nice.
Have you done the old Shawshank Redemption, sort of, crawling through a sea of sewage and then waiting for the heavens to open and just let the rain take you away?
I haven't got any plans, really. I've just been sat at a desk working all day, but...
You should do that when you're finished,
Yeah, we'll see.
Bit of Shawshank. How about you, Dan? Have you not been in quarantine? I've actually, might as well share this with the listeners and the viewers. However you are consuming this, it might be on a podcast, it might be on our YouTube channel. But I've actually now managed to see both Joel and Dan in person, which is a lovely little boost. So it's quite nice, little bit weird. Not quite sure where to look or where the gaze is meant to go. Bit weird, sort of not shaking hands with people. Yeah. But then thinking about it, it was always a little bit weird. We did that anyway, wasn't it?
You almost missed me.
Was weird,
yeah.
I didn't recognise you, Joel. I was off to get me. It was my first haircut since lockdown, so I'm surprised you noticed me. To be fair, because I'm not really someone who you see with a full head of hair. That's probably going a little bit too far to say it was a full head of hair. To be fair, it was trying, but it certainly wasn't. It wasn't the whole shebang. But yeah, it's been nice to see people. I suppose we might as well crack on. And what we want to talk about this week, well. We're going to talk about what's in the news around not just Liverpool, but football in general. We're going to talk about the results of our poll from last week, the tier rankings. If you haven't listened to that episode, please go back. It is available in the archives. We'll discuss that a little bit more in a moment. And also, we want to have a look at the pre-season storylines that we're going to follow. This is both in terms of Liverpool, and if we've got a little bit of time, we might also talk a little bit about the storylines that we're interested in following during pre-season around other clubs, leagues, and just general things. So I suppose we'll crack on with what's in the news. I suppose we'll start with a little bit of Liverpool because there's, I think we will get into what happened over the past week or so a little bit later in terms of Champions League and Europa League. But Thiago, don't want to spend too long on this, gents, but there's more conflicting reports. It's very much one side is saying that that he's not an active target for Liverpool. There's another side who are saying that the deal's all but done. The deal has been agreed in principle between the player and the club. Now, what we're sort of seeing is things from, for example, Fabrizio Romano in The Guardian saying, well, actually, they might be a little bit apart here in the evaluation of the player. So I just want to talk about this in general. Dan, where do you sit on this side of the fence? Because, we sort of know who's saying what. This isn't to say that anybody's wrong or right. It's just an open discussion, I suppose, about where you feel this whole Thiago thing is going.
I'm slightly myself conflicted with it, Chris, if I'm honest, in the sense that it feels like everybody who's reporting on it is giving themselves a way out if the deal doesn't happen. And whilst the statements are very forthright in one sense, i.e. the player and the club have agreed terms, there's still sort of the caveat of, but the two clubs are apart in valuations. That just feels to me like it's a case of, well, if in a month's time and the deal doesn't happen and he moves to PSG, then people can say, well, yeah, I wasn't wrong, just Liverpool and Bayern couldn't agree a deal. And so for me, it's probably one of the oddest transfer sagas of recent times. You sort of pro forma for a transfer saga is club approaches club. We know that in negotiations, either the price is a sticking point and everyone accepts that that's a thing, or the player is, maybe conflicted, gets different offers, waiting for someone else to come in, that type of thing. that's usually how these things play out. This is very, it's very cloak and dagger, and it's one of those where ultimately what the thing I find fascinating is that ultimately someone's going to end up with egg in the face here in some form. And that's even if, Thiago doesn't happen, there's going to be journalists who are going to look a bit silly because they've gone out on a whim. Fair play to them. If they've had good information or whatever, let's not pull down people in the industry because they're trying to, they report on what they believe to be true. But at the same time, it's just one that I find impossible to call. I want it to happen, by the way. I'll just throw that in.
Joe, before I move on to you, I just want to sort of, put it from my perspective there. I think you're spot on, Dan, in the sense that this is a massive myth around transfer windows, and I've been involved in loads as a reporter, and latterly as an editor when I was at the Echo as a sports audience editor. Nobody makes things up. No. When it comes to this kind of thing. Nobody is just going necessarily. They will be well sourced. They'll have good contacts. So when you're looking at people saying Thiago's happening, even though it's happening over in a lot of the noise is coming from Germany, a couple of noises from France, etc. They're not doing this to swell the followers on social media. They're not doing it for that kind of reason. It's just that they're being told one thing, and obviously another side is being told another. Things change in terms of football transfers. We only saw a couple of, what's been the past 24 hours. David Silva looked like he was signed, sealed and delivered, going to Lazio. Everybody reports it. And then all of a sudden he's gone to San Sebastian with Real Sociedad. The journalists who were reporting that he was going to Lazio weren't wrong. It was just the fact that things change. You want to put this onto Liverpool, Nabil Fekir. I had to write the story that it had fallen through at Joe Rimmer's 30th birthday party. That's probably a story for off air, but it's one of the loosest bits of copy I've ever written, I'll tell you that. But it wasn't that it wasn't happening previously. It's just that the goalposts had changed and things had changed. So it's a really interesting situation here where it's clear that two sides of this argument are telling their sort of telling people what they know and what they think they know. And it's just going to be really, really interesting to see. For what it's worth, again, I want Thiago to come to Liverpool, but I would side with the reporters who are saying there's nothing going on. Just because I know the people who are reporting that, and I know things can change, but I just feel like it's quite definitive when they're saying that they're not an active target. But again, Joel, and I'll move this on to you. Just as much as we sort of say there that the sticking point might be the price, and therefore it makes it look like one side of the reporting wasn't right. Well, the other side of that coin is the fact that Liverpool at the moment, it seems like he's not an active target, but could that change? That feels like that could definitely change, especially when the Champions League finishes.
Yeah, the Champions League is the big thing here, I think. It's difficult to define what an active target means. Does that mean they just haven't made an official bid yet, or they're just waiting? Because he could just become an active target in a couple of weeks when the Champions League's all done. That could change. My gut instinct is that I think when the news first broke, it was sort of early July, wasn't it? So it was about 6 weeks or so now. I think if it was complete nonsense and Liverpool weren't interested at all, it probably would have continued as much as it is. If anything, it's been getting stronger over his last few days. So my feeling is that there is something in it. I don't think that necessarily means they're going to sign him this summer. I think there's a couple of other factors there that I think might be significant. I think one is sales. We haven't really heard anything in terms of where Harry Wilson, who's obviously not in Austria at the moment, I think that's due to injury. But you'd expect if offers come in, he might be one that goes on. Grujic, again, is training with a squad, but is another who there's a lot of midfield he's got to break through. So you'd think if Hertha or another club comes in with a decent amount of money, those two alone probably could cover the majority, if not all, of the fee that Bayern are looking for, supposedly. I think as well with the Wijnaldum question, I'm not entirely convinced that this is actually linked to it. I think in an ideal world, they'd extend Wijnaldum's contract and sign Thiago, because I think he's just a great player and they want him. I don't think it's necessarily a case that he's a replacement, but if they have a feeling that Wijnaldum's not going to extend, then they would be silly not to be putting contingency plans in place. As well, I think it's interesting just the kind of language that's used around the fee, because I think initially it was said £30 million. Then some people have been saying 30 million euros, which is closer to sort of 28 million pounds. And you don't know what Liverpool are saying they don't want to pay that, but you don't know what they do want to pay. It could just be 25 million, which if that's the case, it's not that difficult to see them sort of reaching a little bit of a middle ground. If they're only willing to pay 18 or 20, then maybe it becomes a bit more difficult. And that's where I think it was the Guardian piece mentioned the possibility of a pre-contract in January. But then that leads you into, well, he's 29. He's only got a limited amount of seasons left at this level. Do you really want to miss a season of him kind of in this shape when he could help you win a league straight away? And also, if you don't sign him now, then does a Man City or a PSG start to kind of see an opportunity and come in there? There's all these kind of things. So if I was to hedge my bets, I would love it to happen like you two. At the moment, I'm not certain, but I don't think it will. I just feel like there's something about it that I think if it was going to happen, maybe we know more by now. But I think you just got to wait till the Champions League's over and see. But I'd be amazed if there's not some concrete truth behind the rumours.
Another thing, just before we move on to the Champions League and Europa League, you know, I say this, and I'm sure you guys would echo it, but just be nice to people on social media. You know, just be nice. I mean, that goes for everything in life, but you know, with this whole Thiago thing, if somebody's got information and they're saying that Liverpool are interested, just be nice. Just you know, that's fine.
It's not going to ruin your day, is it? It
shouldn't.
It turns out not to be right.
Exactly. Just be nice to people. You don't go to a restaurant, or you shouldn't go to a restaurant and kick off at a waiter because he says that the soup of the day isn't what you want it to be. So, you know, just have a little think about that, please, and let's all try and just be a little bit nicer to each other, especially around the transfer window. On saying that, the next 5 minutes we're just going to spend laughing at Manchester City, Manchester United, Barcelona, and maybe Atletico Madrid. Joel, it was a week that I don't think anybody would have envisioned, but also a week that ultimately, from a Liverpool persuasion, is certainly one of the most memorable since lockdown began.
Yeah, it was great, all of it really.
Are you happy Atletico went out? I just want to take that straw poll. Are you happy?
Yes.
I'm delighted.
So, but that's partly just a kind of a petty thing. Really.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think. I mean, at that point, my thinking was almost, yes, I would prefer them to go out, but also I thought they were probably the team in that side of a draw that had the best chance of stopping Man City, because in my head, City were just going to get to the final, which obviously hasn't turned out to be the case. But yeah, I thought Atletico are a team that's probably going to put up the strongest fight there. It was funny listening to the sort of preamble around that game, because there was a lot of talk about them and how they scored all those goals against Liverpool and stuff, as if they'd kind of powered their way past us. And I thought there wasn't a huge amount in their performance against Leipzig that was drastically different to what they did against Liverpool over two legs. It was just Leipzig didn't make the mistakes that Liverpool made, really. So that was enjoyable. Obviously, the Barca Bayern, I wasn't massively surprised that they got a bit of a hiding. I didn't think it would be 8-2. I mean, I think that took everyone a little bit by surprise. But the whole Coutinho thing was, if you needed a microcosm of why that club is in trouble, and they have a player who they've spent all that money on coming on to score twice and set up one against them in a Champions League quarter-final, that was it. So yeah, that was amusing as well in its own way. And then the City one was, I was almost at the point I didn't even want to watch that match, because I thought that's out of the four quarters, that's the one that's just essentially a default result. City would just win that sort of probably by half time and then just cruise their way. And it didn't happen like that. Again, even when they equalised at 1-1, I just sort of thought they'd go on and score a second and a third and be fairly comfortable. But I mean, I'm sure you guys will come on to it, but what he was doing with his team selection that night to change your entire sort of setup to cater for a team that finished 7th. I know League One didn't finish properly, but they're hardly a behemoth, are they, Leon? And yeah, to play 3-5-2 and yeah, it wasn't the City that you've been scared of for the last few years. So yeah, that was amusing. And then obviously Bernardo Silva's had an interesting few days online as well. So that's all added to the fun.
Dan, you wrote a piece about Bernardo Silva, and it's something that we spoke about. You sort of took the bullet in the editorial meeting that we had about it, and you said, "Oh, go on, I'll write it then." But you know, just it's worth us all talking about it now. He's a bit of a weird character, Bernardo Silva, because he's 24, 25. He's just had a really sort of bang average season for City, but ultimately he just seems a little bit petulant, a little bit annoying. And probably doesn't enamour himself to Guardiola that much. Do you find this a little bit weird, Dan? This kind of almost this Bernardo Silva versus Liverpool sort of angle, because ultimately everyone would always associate either Guardiola or even Raheem Sterling. But you'd imagine if crowds are back come the start of or whenever the crowds are back, we don't know that yet. But you'd imagine he'd get a bit of a rough reception as well. Maybe I'm over deliberating over something that's just an internet storm, but I don't know. It just feels like that, and the Guard of Honour. It feels like he's almost made himself public enemy number one at Anfield.
I think he's probably. I'd imagine in some way Guardiola loves him, because I think he's probably, looking at his actions, he's probably the biggest Guardiola disciple in that squad, in the sense that he just believes anything he says, because it's so intense. Is my point. It's so us against the world that Pep has built, that he just seems to have bought into that times 100. So for me, yeah, he's probably taken it too far, to be honest. I mean, the Guard of Honour was just sheer petulance. And look, we have to come at this from a Liverpool point of view, which we will do. It might be that there's a lot of Manchester City fans who see him as sort of, you know, the voice of the people, if you like, you know, sticking it to the masses, sticking it to the opposition, to the rivals. And you know, we just touched on social media before. You know, nobody has a divine right to be trolled by people of whatever fan base, and certainly no matter based on how much money they earn. So if he's sort of let loose because of that, then fair enough. You know. So that needs to be factored. But at the same time, I thought it was a bit odd that you sort of mocking people on Twitter whilst simultaneously being on Twitter engaging in people that you're mocking. You know what I mean? Like I just thought the whole thing was a bit weird, and then to come back sort of 24 hours later and carry it on. If that was the only question I asked when I wrote the piece was, if that was a Liverpool player, how would you feel? And for me, I'd be feeling a wee bit embarrassed. I've got to be honest. I'd be feeling a little bit like my own team's head wasn't in the right place. Going into another season where you had to compete with this team, you know, and we've been on the other side of this. Let's not kid ourselves. You know, Rafa and Ferguson and his list of facts was correct, by the way, in many senses. It
was also a great diversion tactic, but we won't talk about that today. I've got a massive idea about that. But yeah.
Well, it didn't come off, did it? Let's have it right. I mean, well, we can say it didn't come off. He goes to Old Trafford and wins 4-1. But if you listen and read sort of Xherdan Shaqiri's interpretation of it, it sort of didn't go down well in the dressing room, is my point. And yeah, I think someone should sort of be having a word with Bernardo. But this is my sort of Man City thing, is that to me they don't act like an elite club in that sense. It reminded me a little bit of when Pep lost his head at Anfield and nobody got a grip of him. Nobody basically said to him, sit down. Your head's gone here. You need to sit down. You've completely lost it. They let him just run amok and completely embarrass himself in front of the fourth official, in front of 55,000 fans who absolutely were lapping it up. And I don't think there's that. I just don't think there's that voice collectively inside Man City where it just says, all right, let's rein this in a bit here. Let's just sort of take a bit of a step back. I think it all feels a bit new to them. So the concept of sort of rivalries and manufactured rivalries, Liverpool know well and have done for years. Chelsea's a great example under Rafa, for example, and you go back to Forest in the 80s, and there's all kinds of sort of rivalries beyond your mainstream Everton and Man United. So, yeah, I don't think they quite know how to handle the fact that sort of Jurgen Klopp has got Liverpool to where he's got them, and they expected everything to be on their terms, and now it's not the case.
It's also, Laporte was on as well the morning after losing, kind of whinging about the VAR decision. And I think it's fine to kind of think that and feel aggrieved if you think it was a foul. I'm not entirely sure what it was. But again, it points to that thing that Dan said about the being just a bit thin-skinned, really, for senior pros to be doing that. I think you think of what Liverpool have been through over the last few years, losing the league by a point on the last day, or the Kiev final against Real Madrid, or Atletico Madrid this season, and they would have had all kinds on social media, but you wouldn't want to see Trent or Van Dijk or someone coming out and lashing out at opposition fans on social media. So
sorry, Joel. Nobody's raised a point about Kevin De Bruyne winning Player of the Year. By the way, nobody's kicked up a fuss about it. No, nobody. And rightly so. By the way, we can have our arguments around Sadio Mane and Jordan Henderson, whoever, but everybody's seen De Bruyne win that award and went, yeah, fair enough. Had a great season. Fine, move on. But like you say, Joel, it just seems to be it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy for them, for City. When something like that happens, they see it as a personal affront to them, which is I find completely sort of mad. I don't know.
I was going to bring up we don't want to stay. We could do. Do you know what we could do? It's an interesting one, Man City, because you write things about Man City and people say that they're not interested, but we see how many people read the things that are written about Man City, for example, and they are very well read, and people do care about it. people might want to admit that this is a rivalry, but it does feel like it is some sort of rivalry in whatever way it is. Just to make a really quick point about what you saying there, Dan, about not quite knowing how to behave with this sort of rivalry, this whether it's manufactured or whether it's become more organic, I don't know. But obviously they're all on the plane. That video of them singing, their version of LA, 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 which have got some very derogatory and uncomfortable imagery around things. The lyrics. Obviously not going to repeat them on this podcast. You can always Google that, but that kind of thing, you just wouldn't imagine Liverpool doing that, of course. The only time I've ever sort of in the past 2 years felt a little bit like that with Liverpool, and it's not been on social media, it's been straight after a match in the heat of the moment, is when Andy Robertson, after the 0-0 draw at Everton, and I've just got the quote up here, actually, he said something to the lines of, they think that they've hopefully been wrong. Hopefully our fans can rub it into them at the end of the season. Now, Liverpool go on and win, every game that there is that after that, and just miss out by a point. That's the only time in the past 2 years, or one of the very few times, I thought, you can't let it show that it's getting to you. But that's in the heat of the moment, straight after the game. Bernardo, and look, we've all been there. He's probably been looking at his mentions and just been going, do you know what, everyone, have a day off. You know what I mean? But it's, so I do have a sort of sympathy with him. I think going back for that second bite of the cherry is just a bit, this is enough now, Bernardo. Like, you've had your fun. And just really, really quickly, and then we'll move on. Manchester United not going to win the Europa League. Didn't really matter that they were going to win the Europa League, really, although it's always nice not to see United with a trophy. And also, it turns out they can't defend.
Who knew? I mean, 3 semi-finals is something that just sticks out to me, and that, there was the thing around Klopp for so long, wasn't it, about him being a bottler in big games and one-off games, and yeah, I mean, getting to a final itself looks like an achievement when that's the case. But to sort of bow out at 3 semis, I think that's quite damning. And I never bought into the Klopp thing at all, but just when you look at United and see where the frailties are, they are just the epitome of the minute of falling short. Not even at the last hurdle, before that. And I think that sort of encapsulates that type of feeling for me.
It was a week certainly to remember, and I think speak on behalf of most of us when we say we're definitely going to enjoy the 2 finals. We know it's going to be Sevilla and Inter Milan. I think that'll be a cracking final. That's a UEFA Cup final. That's not a Europa League final. It's a UEFA Cup final, that one. And whether it's ultimately I want it to be PSG Bayern. I think that'll just be the sort of game you can watch on Sunday night and really enjoy it. So yeah, by the time this has gone out, we'll know half of who'll be in that final. But yeah, it'll be a really good final, and it's just nice to know that there's no sort of ultimately Liverpool have had enough to worry about over the past couple of years about who's going to win what. Just nice to watch an important game of football which has absolutely no relevance or bearing on what they do. Want to move on to the poll. This is going to be a regular segment on our podcast. So basically, last week we played a little game called the tier game, and we wanted to split every Liverpool player into one of 6 tiers, which reflected how likely you would be to sell them. So, Alisson, Trent, Van Dijk, all in tier 1 because you would absolutely not sell them. Loris Karius, for example, although he is back in training, he's like a tier 6. It's one of those where if you get a bid for him and it's not derogatory or derisory, you will be taking that. So what we did then is put out on our social channels at Liverpool.com_ on Twitter and also Liverpool.com Facebook page. We put out the polls for you guys, the listeners, to take part in. I just wanted to run through a couple of the results and we can discuss them. And we'll be doing this every week. I think we'll discuss, or we'll be doing it as long as you wanted to do it. If people stop replying to our polls, then we'll take the hint. But for now, we have a decent response. People are interested. So we'll keep on doing this every week. So a couple of little learnings I found from what the listeners sent in. Jensen, Mane was tier 1 far more than Salah and Firmino. With Firmino having actually 28% of the votes saying he should be tier 2, which was more of a world record bid, or in other words, if there was a genuinely blockbuster bid, you'd consider it. So it's, I suppose, from the votes there, the hierarchy goes Mane, Salah, Firmino. I mean, is that in keeping with what you think, Joel, or is that a little bit unfair?
I'm not massively surprised by it. I think we touched on it a little bit last week with Firmino. It's a strange one because in terms of obviously direct goal output, he's by far the lowest of the 3. But you can make an argument he's probably the hardest to directly replace out of the 3, if that makes sense. In terms of it's almost impossible to buy someone who does exactly the same thing. So you could go out and get a striker who scores you 20, 25 goals, but then you're probably going to reduce the output that you're getting from Mane and Salah as a result. I think the only other thing with Firmino as well is he's obviously been there the longest out of all of them. So there's a question of sort of miles on the clock. How many seasons does he have at the same level? But I wouldn't be taking... Well, it would have to take an insane amount of money for me to even think about it. I think with all of them as well, they're not like... Obviously, Mane and Salah are kind of very quick, but they're not players that are absolutely dependent on just raw speed to do what they do. They're intelligent, they're creative. It's not like if they lose 2 or 3% of their speed over the next few years that they become sort of drastically less effective footballers. So, yeah, I'm not hugely surprised. I think that there's maybe a slight surprise in the Mane-Salah discrepancy. If it was me, I would have probably said, in terms of actual market value, Salah's slightly higher, but maybe that's more to do with his kind of the whole image and the off-pitch persona more so in terms of what the difference between them as players, which I think is probably pretty minimal at this point.
81% for Mane in tier 1, 71% for Salah in tier 1.
It's quite a big gap.
It is a really big gap, and then 66% for Firmino, which it was surprising, and obviously Trent, Van Dijk, Alisson all finished higher than all of those three, but it's just an interesting way to look at it, and people would maybe be open to not necessarily selling them, but if a massive bid came in at some point, they will be considering it. We both discussed Matip and Wijnaldum. We all discussed Matip and Wijnaldum on last week's pod, Dan, and both fell within tier 3, which was kind of the, we can be persuaded. We're not actively looking to sell, but throw enough sort of money underneath our noses and we'll listen. Does that surprise you, especially with maybe Matip? I mean, Wijnaldum maybe, as we've spoken about, a bit of a weird one given his current contract situation, but were people sleeping on Matip a little bit?
Yeah, it does shock me. I mean, not in terms of sort of Matip personally per se, because he does have sort of an inconsistency that has continued, but it shocks me in the sense that we write pieces about sort of Fabinho at centre back, and I've wrote something on Grujic at centre back, or you can maybe hint towards Sepp Vandenberg, Keanu Hoover, whoever, and people scream at you that we need a centre back desperately. The voice, the social media voice, is very much that we need to sign a centre back. So I'm a little bit shocked that so many would sort of move to get rid of another one if the right offer came in, because then that sort of doubles that need, and will probably lead to a midfielder playing there for a considerable amount of the season, really, especially if there was an injury to Gomez or Van Dijk. So that surprises me. Wijnaldum doesn't, because of the situation. I'm just interested. I've been sort of fascinated by the perception of Wijnaldum. I don't think it's changed too much with the contract situation, but I find it that people do kind of see him as maybe the most dispensable of the midfielders, and that's a midfield including the likes of Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, Naby Keita, James Milner. It does feel quite relaxed about.
Is it numbers, Dan?
In terms of statistics?
Yeah, is that what it is? Is there no tangible goals, assists, chances created? Wijnaldum is the ultimate undefinable player.
I mean, I guess so. I mean, I guess it is probably a little bit of a sense of sort of, I don't want to say inconsistency, but he does have games where he doesn't light it up, and we all sort of were quick to sort of dismiss the Newcastle theory that he couldn't play away from home, but he does perform better at Anfield. You can't deny it. He does have games where after 55 minutes you're wondering where he's been on a football pitch, and I'm not tagging him. I love him to bits. I think he's phenomenal. I think in the big games he turns up massively. I think he'll go down as a really underrated player whenever he does leave Liverpool. I just wonder with this whole thing whether sort of the data analysts, the team around Jurgen Klopp has seen something with his numbers and his trajectory, and that might be why they're acting on trying to get Thiago in now, or they're a bit more relaxed about his contract situation than we think. I don't know. I'm purely speculating there.
Naby Keita ranged pretty much from 1 to 3, which I thought it kind of encapsulates what Keita is. Some people think that he is absolutely indispensable. Other people will potentially think about moving him on if the price was right. But by and large, he was very much in tier 2, where it's a case of, if we get a big bid, listen to it. And then Oxlade-Chamberlain, interestingly, was probably the most evenly distributed. So he had, I'll just get the numbers up now. If I can just find the Ox chart there. So we have tier 1, 12%, tier 2, 22%, tier 3, 54%. So it was the majority tier 3 again. But then tier 4, 10.5%. Nothing really for tier 5 and tier 6. So again, it's interesting that Keita and Oxlade-Chamberlain feel like they're the two players who could be sort of the future of Liverpool's midfield. I mean, I say future, actually, Chamberlain's 27 now, but, he's still young. But, these two are sort of seen as the injection of something that the midfield needs at the moment, but, they're very much divided. And then just finally, Joel, Shaqiri, Origi and Grujic, I think I've lumped them all together here in terms of the results from the voters, just because they were all pretty much tier 4 or tier 6. So it's very much fans are very open to either selling these players for a good price or just selling them full stop. I mean, where's you sit on those three?
I wouldn't necessarily clump them all together. I think there's slightly different cases. I think with Origi, there's definitely... I don't want to be harsh on the guy because we all love him and he's a club legend and all that, but it's like, I think there's enough people who have seen enough of Origi now that they just want something different. They don't want to see him coming off the bench for the last 20 minutes for another season. And there's maybe an argument that Origi doesn't necessarily want to do that himself for that much longer, maybe one more season, but he's at some point got to think about playing regularly. And yet he's by far the most established out of those three in terms of like a sure bet. You know what you're going to get out of him. It's not always exactly what you want. Shaqiri is a fascinating one. I know we're going to come on to sort of pre-season storylines, and he's one that I'm intrigued by. I've written something about him the last few days because he's been speaking about his ambitions for the next season, and he's one that I think a lot of people would almost put on the same list as kind of Dejan Lovren going into the summer as a near definite to leave, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I think given the season he's just had, he's only played, I think it was 280 minutes in all comps, barely anything. He's one where I struggle to see many clubs gambling the money just because of his age, his injury record. He's not a sure bet at all. And I think for Liverpool, there's an argument with Shaqiri. He's got 3 years left on his current deal. And I think if you keep him for one more season and he stays fit, or at least more fit than he was last season, and plays a few good games, you probably get more money next summer when things are a little bit more stable than you would if you just cashed in right now. So I wouldn't be keen on shifting him on. And Grujic is the one where I think when you write all the names down that Liverpool have in midfield going into the season, I think he comes in at something like number 9 on the list, and that's without Thiago. So unless Dan's thing of him being looked at centre-back, which is an interesting idea, but I'm not sure Klopp's actually going to look at it at all. He's one where I'm actually surprised that Hertha haven't come in with more of an offer than they have already. I don't think
they have money. They have money here, Seth.
Yeah.
They have money.
And all the noise coming out of there was a quote that he's one of the best midfielders they've had, or something over the last couple of seasons. They've really liked what they've seen of him. And they signed a couple of midfielders themselves in January, so I don't know whether that maybe plays into it. But he, out of those three, I think is the one where you think he's probably most immediately dispensable just because of the sheer weight of numbers in front of him.
Good chat, lads. I think next week, so we'll be running another poll, and we'll be doing this again. We'll be asking you, the viewer/listener, to give us your thoughts with a poll. You can also, while you're doing that, if you want to sign up for our Liverpool.com newsletter, all you have to do is leave your email, and we'll be sending you a newsletter every week. That's certainly the plan anyway. It hasn't been getting sent recently, but we've just had a couple of, as you've probably heard, Joel's been in quarantine for 14 days, so we can't be launching newsletters while people are in quarantine. So we will be doing that though, sending you weekly newsletters. So if you go to our social channels, Liverpool.com on Facebook, or at Liverpool.com_ on Twitter. And similarly, if you want to, if you listen to this podcast, it'll be in the description, the link. If you watch it on YouTube again, have a look at the description, and there'll be a link there to take part in the poll. So next week, we'll be discussing the results of this week's poll, and this week's poll is, who do you think will get the most first team minutes this season? Between Curtis Jones, Nico Williams, Harvey Elliott, Kiana Hoover, Rhian Brewster, and Sepp van den Berg. Just in one word, gents, who would you be voting for there?
Curtis Jones, yeah.
Maybe Williams for me, Jones or Williams. We'll be interested to see what people believe in. Right, so we're moving on to the pre-season story. By the way, I just need to say, Dan, you were giving a really, really good answer there about Joel Matip, but someone had a nice screen van in the background. And I
That
don't
was
know
me,
who
that.
it was. Was it you? Yeah.
That was me, yeah.
I stopped listening to you halfway through and just started thinking of mini milks and feasts.
I'm buzzing that came through. I didn't think it would.
No, yeah. It's a good little bit of ambience, to be honest.
Phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, I was really happy with that. So I had no idea what you think about Matip or Wijnaldum, but I know that I really want a 99er. Pre-season storyline. So obviously Liverpool are back in training. They're over in Austria at the moment, about an hour outside of Salzburg, and you have absolutely no chance of hearing me try and pronounce where they actually are staying. But they are somewhere in Austria, in the mountains. And it's one of my favourite times of the year, to be honest, because it's full of expectation, full of hope, and the idea that it's almost a clean slate. And they've got a lot to defend this season, so for me, I'm really looking forward to pre-season. Do you lads ever pay attention to pre-season? I mean, what's your general feeling around it?
Yeah, I do. We're writing sort of a bit of a fun piece at the minute about seeing players back in pre-season who you thought had long left the club and stuff like that. It is a bit of an odyssey in terms of it's, when you look at the pitches in like February, March, it just seems like a lifetime away. And it does remind you of sort of the longevity of a football season in the 9-month span and how much can happen within that. But yeah, I enjoy it like you, Chris. We often sort of lambast the concept of transfers and why everyone loves them so much, but that's the reason why, isn't it? You want to see the players come back, you want to see the new player in the training kit, and you want to sort of see him gelling with the squad, and it just adds to that sense of unknown and excitement. And yeah, it's an odd one though. This season, it's going to be over literally after the Community Shield, because then we lose the majority of players to the Nations League, the internationals. So that's going to be a real sort of blow to Jurgen Klopp. I think that he gets 2 weeks with them now, which I'm sure he's maximising to the fullest while they're in Austria. But as soon as that full-time whistle goes against Arsenal at Wembley, he's gonna lose his players, a large bulk of them for the majority of 2 weeks, and then they only come back sort of a couple of days before the first game. So it's really, really tough, that. And I think we'll sort of know how crucial this time is now come the end of next season at the business end, when the stories are coming out about sort of how they sort of diverted plans and how they modified plans to make a league season work within the confines of this altered time that they've got.
So Joel, what storylines are you looking forward to reading about, to writing about, and just generally sort of being around there in the next 2-3 weeks until the season starts? What are the sorts of things that are going to pique your interest?
More on Shaqiri. I touched on it a little bit there, but I think he's fascinating because, so he played, could you guess how many minutes he's played in a calendar year? I was astonished when I found this out the other day, in 2020 alone.
150.
Are we talking the last calendar year?
This calendar year currently, so since January onwards to now.
About 63 or something like that.
It's 17. So he came off the bench. He came off the bench against Spurs in January, and then Arsenal was the only time he came in the restart. So yeah, if you'd asked me a few weeks ago, I would have said absolutely, like they'd take almost any money they could to get rid for summer. But I just think now, given there's such a short turnaround and the weight of fixtures and the small gaps between them, I just think there's almost no point really getting rid. If he wants to stay, which from the words he was saying about how he's kind of really excited to make up for lost time and he wants to help the team win more titles. And I know you hear players say stuff like this before, and doesn't mean that if an offer doesn't come in the next few weeks that he could still leave. But I just think if you look at games like if Liverpool are at home against an Aston Villa or a West Brom or something, and Salah's played the last 6 games in a row and needs a break, I'm still at a point where I'd rather see Shaqiri starting in that sort of game than chucking Harvey Elliott in from the start. And I know you can't judge loads, but if you've been watching any of the Inside Anfield clips of the training sessions, he looks really sharp. He looks fit. He looks excited to be back. So he's a player I've always enjoyed watching, and I did a little bit of digging on his numbers from his first season, and he comes out really well in all kinds of metrics in terms of expected assists, key passes, expected goals, everything. He's sort of in the top 3 or 4 in the squad, really, just outside kind of the main front three. So there is quality. It's just whether he can stay fit again, because it was strange last season. He had one sort of big calf injury, and then it was just a kind of unexplained absence that continued for most of the season, really. So I'd like to see him back. I think the other one that I'm interested in is Brewster. Because if you go back to kind of this time last summer or July last summer, he was the story of pre-season. I think he got 4 goals in the first 3 matches. And at the time, a lot of the talk about why Liverpool weren't going to sign anyone in the summer was because Brewster was seen as someone who could come in and be almost that first choice sub off the bench, probably even ahead of Origi, and his performances initially backed it up. I think that is the trouble with pre-season. There's always one player who does something brilliant and you think this could be their breakthrough. I remember in seasons gone by, Iago Aspas, Danny Pacheco, Suso, there's always one of them. And I think Brewster's got more talent than a lot of those, and obviously he's done brilliantly at Swansea. I think it was 11 and 22, so basically a goal every other game there since January. I think there is an opportunity for him. I suspect a lot of it will come down to whether he can do bits and pieces out wide as well. I think that will be key in terms of his chances. But yeah, he's one I'd like to see. I think what makes this pre-season different and difficult to assess in comparison to other ones is usually you'd have a few sort of domestic friendlies to begin with and then a tour, whereas there's a little bit of talk. I think they're going to try and play a friendly against Salzburg in the next few days if possible, but that's obviously going to be behind closed doors. I don't know if you even see the highlights, so it's quite possible until the Community Shield and the first game of the season you won't actually get to see anything of these players, so you kind of got to go off bits and pieces of what you hear out of the camp, I suppose.
Dan, by the time this podcast is live, your piece about Brewster will be live. He's been linked, so it's confirmed that Liverpool have had half a dozen inquiries. I think Paul Gorst wrote on the Echo. I think clubs such as Newcastle, Aston Villa, Brighton, Crystal Palace have been mooted in terms of a possible loan deal. But you feel like that's not an option this summer?
Yeah, I mean, my worry, Chris, is that if he goes out on loan again, it's sort of the beginning of the end. I think people might see that as absolutely crazy, given the fact he's 20 years old. And while I appreciate that, my point is more that sort of if he doesn't get a chance this season, when does he? Joel's referenced to Rhian and the uncertainty around him now more than ever. We don't look like we're going to bring an attacker in. There's talk of Ismaila Sarr, but that all feels very, very quiet and down in recent days. And then there's the fixture chaos. We're going to be playing sort of twice a week for a condensed period throughout the season. October through to New Year basically is one where I don't think we get a break given on what type of fixture schedule is certainly proposed. So for me, I think there is a place for him to compete. I think sort of making him and Origi compete for the same sort of role and position, because there is certainly that job that Jurgen Klopp wants doing, whether it be from the start or from the bench, that we've seen Origi struggle with at times last season. I think is something I prefer. I think we should keep him. I just don't see sort of, unless we've got a real plan to embed him into the team and the squad next season, what we get out of sending him to Crystal Palace and Roy Hodgson, whereby, like you said earlier, Chris, he has 3 games without a goal and he's all of a sudden on the bench because Christian Benteke's been given the nod and is asking for things on his head. So, yeah, it doesn't. I don't see the appeal in it personally.
In terms of your storylines as well, Dan, what are you looking forward to seeing?
Yeah, similar. Brewster is definitely one. Takumi Minamino is a big one, because I think sort of how we use Minamino is going to be telling. I've just referenced the fixtures there. When we get the fixtures, the actual sort of games that we're playing, it's going to be really interesting to see sort of what the first half of the season looks like in terms of difficulty. I think if we've sort of got a fixture list that we're happy with for the first half of the season, I think you might see in what pre-season games we play a couple of changes of shape where we look a little bit more 4-4-2, 4-2-3-1. You know, Shaqiri maybe comes back in, as Joel's referenced. But then just how we use Minamino might give us an insight into how the manager sees sort of saving legs for that first half of the season and making sure that the players can be fit and firing at the business end of it. And I think that'll be really interesting. That, and also, you know, how he's developed, how he's sort of taken on board his first 6 months in English football, because it did look like a baptism of fire to him. And also, you know, the other one for me is Ox. I think I've been really surprised by just how many people have said they would sort of dispose of Oxlade-Chamberlain, and I've also sort of intimated that he had a bad season. He came back from a horrific, almost career-threatening injury, and I think that's been really unfair on him. I think in that context, he actually had a really good season. I think he had he was the highest scorer outside of the front three. He was asked to do jobs in different places and done them and worked hard for the team. And he didn't look out of place in the team. You know, he sort of knows where the press is. He knows sort of where to be when the ball breaks down in that very sort of Jurgen Klopp type mould. So that hasn't left him. And for a sort of comeback season from what I say, like I say, it was a horrific injury. I think it's been really unfair to him. So I'm excited for Ox. I think he's got a big season ahead of him, and I think that maturity he's got from sort of coming back and being part of the squad again after sort of not being part of the squad that won the Champions League, really, to be part of the squad that won the Premier League. I think his confidence will be up.
I won't lie, Dan. I think you picking Oxlade-Chamberlain and Minamino is throwing a lot of shade my way.
Never, mate. Absolutely not. Although I can't believe you picked them as a number 4 in the tiers, but you know, we'll leave that.
I don't think they're bad players. I just don't know if they're as good as maybe others think. But we'll see. I hope they prove me wrong. I also said Fabinho will be a Sampdoria on loan after a season. I'm the opposite of a broken clock. In terms of mine, I'll leave players. I mean, there's a couple of players I am interested in. I think Curtis Jones is really interesting. I do feel like he could actually become a genuine first team member, where he's getting about 1,000, maybe 1,500 minutes. I'm interested in Keita to see if A, he can keep fit, and B, where he fits into this whole structure and setup. You know, I don't know if anyone's a fan. I think you're a fancy football player, Joel, but fancy Premier League. He's 5.5 million at the moment, and I think he could be an absolute steal. But the storyline I'm really sort of interested in is around the fixtures and the return of football, and what this looks like and how it's going to impact how Liverpool plan. One of the big things I'm really interested in is how meticulous Liverpool are generally around planning for things. It feels like things that everybody else disregards in terms of fixtures lists coming out and the Champions League dates and Champions League draws and that kind of thing. I feel like that's where Liverpool get their gains, because they actually sort of take that data on board and use it to plan even further for the season. So, you know, the fixtures, we're not quite sure when they're out. Friday at the latest is what they're saying. You know, the league are being tight-lipped about it for some strange reason. But yeah, I'm interested in looking at that, because I feel there's a lot of, you know, I think as you've just mentioned there, Dan, the idea of, you know, if there's an easier start to the season, does that mean Liverpool don't go for any sort of transfer window activity? If Liverpool have an awful 6-7 games at the start of the season again, a little bit like last season. That people forget, I think, how difficult some of those games were. What did they do there? Did they decide, we need to sort of, move into gear here around bringing some new players through? Look, Liverpool aren't going to sort of have a transfer market dictated by if they're playing West Ham or Man City in September or October. But what it will do is just sort of show them exactly how it works, and exactly what might be necessary of them. It's a very interesting fixture list, even without knowing who Liverpool are playing at the moment. They released it last week around, what dates the match days are going to be, and you're already looking and you can see that the first half of the season seems a lot more bunched up than the second half of the season. There's a lot of midweek games. There's that really, really difficult December, which I think Liverpool's they will be in the Champions League and maybe even the League Cup. You're looking at maybe 10, 11 games in December. So there's all of this sort of thing, which I don't think people will be necessarily that interested in, especially because at the moment fans aren't allowed back in the stadiums. But I think it'll be really important to Liverpool, and I'll be really interested in seeing when the fixtures come out and what happens next. I think one of the other things around that is, as I say, in terms of the fans, their return, because I think that's going to make a massive difference. And I think it's important that at some point, and look, I mean, football is not a priority at the moment, and I think we are just fortunate that we are watching live sport, and we managed to see Liverpool lift the Premier League, given what's still going on in the world. But I think at some point there's got to be some sort of roadmap to what happens and when it happens in terms of fans getting back in the stadiums. And these fixtures are going to matter in the sense of if Liverpool have to go to an empty Goodison Park, an empty Old Trafford, an empty Turf Moor, and an empty, I was going to say White Hart Lane, but Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, that's a lot different than playing in front of a crowd, even if it's not a full capacity. So I think that's a really interesting thing to note when the fixtures come out. It's just sort of who Liverpool are playing at the very start, who they might be playing when fans are returning. Could you imagine if Liverpool sort of the first game back, Liverpool were at home to Man City, and even if there was only 25-33% of fans in the stadium, it'd be incredible. It'd be a fantastic occasion, and it'd be that sort of extra little boost for the players. The fact that they were playing in front of fans again in such a high importance game. Whereas, if Liverpool are having to go to Goodison Park and Old Trafford and fans are back in there, we're not saying that would necessarily daunt them, but they're two places that Liverpool haven't won under Jurgen Klopp, apart from the Sadio Mane derby in 2016. So, I think these kind of things, as well as how the players are doing in pre-season, as well as like the transfer rumours, I think one of the big things is sort of what the Premier League and the government do around both the fixtures and the return to stadiums. Don't know if anyone has anything to say about that, or you just sit there. You just sit there, just going, I can't believe he's just said that. Why did you stick with Curtis Jones?
I heard Joel's name, so I just left it.
You just nailed it so comprehensively. It's nothing.
We do agree, though, don't we? In terms of, I think people are sleeping on this, aren't they? In terms of, if anything, and God, this might be a bit controversial, but if anything, I think this season's got more of an asterisk next to it than last season, because I think there is no real. Things could open and then close again and be suspended and then start again, and there could be players who are going down with COVID from certain teams. You've got the cross-continental, the intercontinental travel with the Champions League to factor in. It's just going to be a lot harder to deal with this season than last season, I think.
Definitely. I think the only thing I would add in terms of kind of the intensity of fixture schedule is if that does play into anyone's hands, I think Liverpool are better equipped than most. I think it's no coincidence that almost every season under Klopp, but definitely the last two seasons, I don't think they dropped a single point in the league in December. I don't think over the last two seasons. And I remember a lot of the conversation in 2019-20. I never know whether to refer to it as last season yet or the season just gone. But we'll
fixture list makes it last season.
Yeah, we'll say 1920. But a lot of a conversation with that and the Club World Cup and everything was that was going to be a hellish month for Liverpool, and they'd have to go to Qatar and come straight back and then play Leicester away and then have Wolves straight after that. And they cruised through it. And I think that's because, Klopp goes on about it all the time, but the importance of rhythm and momentum, I think, does sort of play into our hands as well. Just to touch on a point Dan mentioned earlier as well about kind of to go back on pre-season and things. I think all of this might sort of necessitate a bit more flexibility in terms of shape and stuff like that, because Liverpool have played essentially broadly the same way with some subtle tweaks for the last 4 seasons, really. It's been 4-3-3, and I think there are ways where you can sort of balance the squad a little bit more by changing the shape. I did something for our What's Next series on the site about the 4-2-2, which is essentially a variation of the 4-4-2, but I think that opens up a lot more kind of opportunities for players like Minamino, who at the moment it's like he's only really got one way into the team, which is where Firmino currently plays. He doesn't look like a wide forward or a midfielder. So I think you might see as a result of kind of having a game every 3 days, Klopp needs to sort of maybe change the shape a little bit more and to kind of use players that ordinarily might sort of struggle to make that 4-3-3 setup.
Thanks very much, gents. I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me this week, Joel and Dan, and thank you, the listener or the viewer, whichever way. Well, I don't know what should we try and we'll come up with a name for them next week. So we'll come up, sort of the acolytes or the disciples. That's probably a little too. That's probably a little bit too. The .commers maybe. I don't know. But thank you if you've stuck this far with us. It is very much appreciated. Make sure you are checking us out on social media. Make sure you're getting involved in our poll. We'll be talking about that next week. Make sure you're giving a subscribe to the Blood Red channel in general. You've got all sorts of great stuff on there. And also just make sure that you're giving a like as well and a subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're getting closer and closer to 100,000 subscribers. And I hear if that happens, then Ollie Connolly might streak naked down Oxford Road in Manchester. Don't quote me on that one. So thanks very much for joining us this week. We'll be back next week. Hope you enjoy the Champions League. Hope you enjoy the Europa League. And we'll keep an eye on pre-season and see what develops there. So in the meantime, take care and stay safe. Thank you.